Y'all know what it is.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Eggs. Today's special guest is cybersecurity thought leader Christian Espinosa. Christian is the best-selling author of the popular book, The Smartest Person in the Room. An entrepreneur, a cybersecurity engineer, a certified high-performance coach, professor, and lover of heavy metal music and spicy food, he's also an Air Force veteran and Ironman triathlete. Christian used to put heavy value on being the smartest guy in the room, only to realize that his greatest contribution to the fight against cybercrime is his ability to bring awareness to the issue through effective communication and leadership training, something that's not always available to the high IQ people building the systems. He has made it his focus through his coaching, speaking, and training to make the smartest people in the room also the best leaders in the space. Joining the show today for a conversation about his entrepreneurial journey, why we're losing the cybersecurity war, how to handle a team made up of the smartest people in the room, developing emotional intelligence, and so much more. Please join us in welcoming to the show, Christian Espinosa. Hey, Christian, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Hey, Ryan. I'm doing great. Thanks for the awesome intro there.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for being awesome. We're always looking forward to great hosts. Mike and I both have interest and expertise in technology. So we always love talking to tech guys. We always love talking to entrepreneurs. And the fact that you're a heavy metal fan is always a win. You know, it hits me near and dear to my heart. So
awesome.
So that's great.
I take it you're a metal fan as well.
We both are.
Yep, we're both. In fact, Mike does an event each week. He's a DJ by trade, but sound engineer and everything by education. And he actually runs lights and sound sort of gratis for a metal get together every so often, which is pretty awesome.
Oh, awesome!
It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Why don't you give us a little background on your background? What did you do? How'd you get into cybersecurity and take us back?
Yeah, I started my career in the Air Force. I went to the Air Force Academy and graduated and did communications. So most of my career in the Air Force was actually in information assurance, as they call it, in the military. And when I got out of the Air Force after 6 years, I was a defense contractor. So I did cybersecurity for different Air Force organizations and traveled around the world helping secure and optimize Air Force installations. And then I left that job and did a commercial job for a while where I was a VP of security products for a company. And at that company is sort of where I had a defining moment where I had a run-in with a CEO. And I just didn't see eye to eye, and it's caused me a lot of stress. So I decided to quit that job without having another job lined up. And that's the first time I'd ever done that in my career. And I just figured, you know what? I'll make it work. I've got contacts. I can do freelance work. So I did freelance work for about 6 years, teaching cybersecurity courses, doing ethical hacking or white hat hacking all over the world. And then I started my own company in 2014, Alpine Security, because I kind of got bored with the freelance work. I thought it was, kind of got easy, and I felt like I wasn't growing. And I felt like a way to grow is to start a company and hire people and scale it. I figured that would force me to grow to a higher level. And then I sold that company in December of 2020, and I'm launching a new cybersecurity company called Blue Goat Cyber. I just launched that in January this month. And, amongst all that stuff, I've written a book. I do Ironman triathlon. I do anything where there's a waiver where you have to sign, meaning you could possibly lose a limb or die. That's attractive to me. I was in Vegas not too long ago and drove a Ferrari and a Lamborghini around this racetrack as fast as you can go. So that was pretty cool.
That's awesome. I just went right to trampoline park, but I guess that's my kids.
Hey, that's dangerous too,
Hey, Ryan, I have a buddy that went to one of those trampoline parks and blew out his knee in 3 different places.
Yeah.
So it's not a Ferrari ride, though. I'd rather do that, I think. So cool. Well, tell us, I guess then. So, you went into military. Do you come from a family of military people? And the reason I'm asking is because one thing I've noticed as a theme in sort of your career and the things that you do is you tend to push against stereotype. And one of the things that's sort of a stereotype of, military people, and maybe this is a lame stereotype, but is sort of they take direction, take orders, they're rigid, they're disciplined, they do the things they're supposed to do, but it all comes from above, right? Like they're not necessarily doing the decision making, they're rather, doing what they're told to do. But additionally, in tech and IT, one of the big pushes that you've basically written the book on is trying to help people who are sort of the stereotypical tech nerd learn how to communicate and how to become a better leader. So I see this trend in you that you're pushing against stereotypes in some way. And so what I'm trying to get at is your entrepreneurial background. Like, were you always that way, or were you sort of the military version and entrepreneurship fell into your lap?
I think I was always pushing against stereotypes. I went to the Air Force Academy because I grew up in extreme poverty with a mother addicted to pain meds and, drugs and things. So that was like an escape out of my environment. So I worked hard to get out of Arkansas, which is where I grew up, in that environment. And that's why I joined the military. I only lasted 6 years because I don't like taking direction from other people, especially if I don't respect the person that's giving me the direction. And I don't always think the rules pertain. In various situations, the rules don't make sense. And I like to think outside the box a little bit. And so I didn't come from a military background. My grandfather was in World War II, but that was really about it. I mainly went to the military to get out of my poverty and my, childhood, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and that's an interesting story too. I mean, for a lot of people, the military really does serve a great purpose for that, right? I mean, whether it's poverty or education or whatever it is that you're looking for, the military can actually serve to, prepare you for what's next, right? And so in your case, you picked up a fair bit of tech education, so internet security education that you were then able to parlay into work. So I guess you took from the military what you needed from it, but at the same time, it wasn't necessarily the reason you got into being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think the reason I got into being an entrepreneur is just a logical progression for me. I was in the military, I was a contractor, I did freelance work, I worked in the commercial sector, and like the next thing, the next step to me seemed like to start my own company. And I had a business while I was doing defense contracting work on the side with a partner. And that was like a part-time business where we worked on weekends and after hours. But my partner moved to Germany, so I kind of dissolved that business. So I always had that desire to build something in me. It just didn't really materialize like in a solid manner, like for sure with certainty, until I started Alpine Security.
Well, and so what's interesting too is as you moved through that process, you also went on to sell this business, right? So somebody who maybe didn't necessarily have business training, or maybe even really an entrepreneurial background outside of that, you've managed to do something that many entrepreneurs never actually get to, which is the sale or the exit. So, I mean, can you talk a little bit about just sort of that progression and how, that actually came to an end?
When I started the business, I made pretty much every mistake you can possibly make. I didn't understand marketing. I didn't even know the difference between marketing and sales. And I sort of thought if I just built this business, kind of like Field of Dreams, the clients will just come. The clients didn't come. So I had to really work on marketing. And one of the things I really focused on like the last couple of years of the business, which I think helped me sell the business, was this thing called the one-page strategic plan, the OPSP, as they like to call it, which really forces you to get it ironed out with clarity, like what your niche is, what your offering is, what your messaging is, what your differentiators are, what your core values are, what your targets are, and all of that stuff. And when I did that, we shifted our focus because we did cybersecurity, but that's a very broad topic. We shifted our focus to medical device cybersecurity, which there weren't a lot of people doing that. So once we focused on that specific niche, our sales increased because if you search for medical device cybersecurity on Google, we were the first company to pop up. So we got a lot of inbound leads by really niching down and adopting more of a blue ocean strategy. So we're trying to be very specific to specific audience versus broad and say we offer cybersecurity to everybody. It seems counterintuitive when you first start a business, but the more you niche it down the more likely your success. And that's really what kind of got us on a path or trajectory to the sale.
So I think that's really unique and a good insight to niche down into medical devices in general, because it's like you said, it's such a broad field. You could go a lot of different ways in cybersecurity, and to be able to pinpoint it and hone in on medical devices is very wise. Can you actually talk about any of your work as far as like flaws or things that you came across in that field? Like, can people actually hack a pacemaker or something like that? Is that like kind of what you were honing in on?
Yeah, we did a lot of work with medical devices. Can be like all over the spectrum. Something is complicated as an instrument that tracks like your movement of your eye while someone does LASIK surgery. We did assess those. Probably the one that we found the greatest risk was this device that if you're in the hospital and they need to figure out what's wrong with you, they'll take a sample of your blood and test it with this device. And this device will tell you what bacteria you have and recommend some sort of treatment plan or a drug based on the antibiotic based on the bacteria you have. So we found a device, we tested a device like that, and there were a lot of vulnerabilities. And it seems like a simple, not that big of a deal. But if you have like sepsis, which means your blood is toxic, and the device says you don't, you can die, for instance. And this same device was also used in industry or industrial settings for like hamburger processing, for instance. So let's just say from a cyber attack perspective, you infiltrated the supply chain and tainted the hamburger, let's say, with E. coli or salmonella. Then when it's tested by this device, which was vulnerable at the time, it tests negative for those things when in fact the hamburger was positive. This is released to McDonald's or Jack in the Box or wherever, and you can kill a lot of people. Yeah. So there's a lot of scenarios you could really build if you think through like an attacker or someone trying to plan something that a lot of people don't consider with a medical device. And that's just one. We tested other devices that basically do surgery on your spine. So if you can hack that device and it does the surgery wrong on your spine, it can cause a lot of damage as well.
Yeah. As general public, I doubt a lot of people are actually thinking about an attack on a medical device. Like I would never think to like, it's just me, hanging out like, let's go hack a hospital and go after this device that works on your spine or,
it's an interesting, I was just going to say it's an interesting insight too for me, because as I think of cybersecurity, and obviously I'm not a professional, but as I think of it, I think, I guess, more outbound into like a network, right? So it's more like network stuff. It wouldn't even had occurred to me. And it makes total sense given that everything is internet connected these days, but it wouldn't have made sense to me, or I wouldn't have thought of that. I would have thought the vulnerability would have been like at the server or network level,
the data
at the device level. Yeah.
That's
an interesting insight.
Yeah.
The medical devices make it much more tangible because, if you lose your credit card information or somebody defaces your website, it's like kind of a big deal. But if somebody hacks into a drug infusion pump, which is controlling the flow rate of morphine to you, and they increase it, for instance, and cause you to die, that's a bigger deal. So there's a lot more risk with medical devices than a lot of people, I think, realize. And we just sort of have gotten by with not having a lot of major incidents so far, but I think this problem has largely been ignored.
Yeah. And, it's awesome that people like you actually pay attention to that. And is it just a matter of going in and making sure that their software is up to date and their latest and greatest, or are you dealing with firewalls as far as when it comes to those types of equipment? Are they, obviously if they can be hacked, they're probably connected to the internet. So I maybe break that down for us about how you would combat that.
With a medical device, typically it's in a public area. It could be a hospital room, but you have visitors to a patient there. So we look at all the interfaces into that device. It could be a USB port. It could be Bluetooth. It could be Wi-Fi. It could be an Ethernet connection. So it's not just an attack across the network. That's certainly one of the things we look at, but it's also the physical stuff. Because even I was in the hospital the other day. I have a family member that's in the hospital, and I was just kind of looking around his room, and a number of devices had exposed USB ports. You could easily put something in there and get into that device. And some of them were devices that monitored his vitals. Another one was a drug infusion pump, like we talked about. So there's a lot of vulnerabilities with these devices, and it's just a matter of time before somebody really starts exploiting them. They've been proven to be exploitable, a lot of them. It's just, if somebody really wanted to target somebody and kill them, this is the way to do it.
Mm. Yeah. No, I think that's super interesting. So, because just like I say, it wouldn't have occurred to me. One of the other things I'd like to talk about in your sort of entrepreneurial journey, maybe before we go further down the cybersecurity path, is talking about, I guess, sort of separating the wheat from the chaff. I heard an interview that you did on somebody else's show, and there was a segment where you guys were talking about sort of hiring the right people, and that this was one of the big challenges that you came across when you were trying to build your business. And, not only hiring the right people, but also knowing when to say goodbye and when to cut the cord. And so I wonder if you talk just a little bit about your experience in A, hiring people, but B, knowing when it's time to let people go.
I used to hire people based on their technical skills only. Like if I needed someone that was a expert penetration tester to test web applications, I would look for the technical skills. And I largely ignored like cultural fit or core value fit or anything like that. And I realized after a lot of hires and a lot of problems that the majority of the problems I had were not because of lack of technical skills. They were because of a lack of people skills and cultural fit and core value alignment. Because I used to think, I worked for a lot of companies over the years, that these core values are just a bunch of BS. Mm-hmm. I thought people just said, oh, you're supposed to have integrity, service before self, whatever. I just thought it's just stuff on a wall that doesn't matter. But when I had my own company, what I realized when I reflected and zoomed out on the problems I have with my personnel, that they did not have my core values. So I actually went down and wrote 7 of my core values and decided to hire people based on core value alignment and people skills first. And if they passed that, then I would look at their technical skills. But I wouldn't even bother looking at their technical skills if they weren't aligned culturally or from a core value perspective first. And then the other part you ask about is like firing people or terminating them. That's always been a challenge on me because one of my core values is ownership. So I feel like if somebody's not doing well, it's up to me to kind of mentor them or train them or coach them in a way to help them improve. And it took me a long time to realize if somebody is not open to improving or to change their behavior, it doesn't matter what I do, they're not going to improve. And I started listening to my gut instinct. My gut's never been wrong. And like when my gut told me to get rid of somebody, but I rationally, intelligently, like with my mind, rationalized why I should keep them, I just ended up having more problems. So I should have followed my gut initially and got rid of them. And one example that comes to mind is I had this guy I thought about bringing on as a partner for my company, but this guy would cuss in front of clients, would make everybody feel stupid, and he didn't have what it took to be a leader in the company. So I had this conversation with him, and he got defensive and basically said, so you're asking me to change who I am? I said, I am asking you to change who you am if you want to become this in the company. Otherwise, your time in the company is limited. So it's interesting that some people so fiercely defend their identity, but their identity in some cases is actually holding them back from a position they may want or a relationship they may want or the success they may want to have.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, or I would imagine, and of course it's me projecting a little bit, but I imagine as you started to outline these core values and started to hire to those, I suppose that maybe the chasm between the people who weren't on board or who weren't willing to learn became smaller. Maybe you started to get hires that were a little more in tune with what you were looking for. And maybe one of the things that you mentioned in the interview that I mentioned that I heard that stood out specifically was this sort of doing what you say, the not just using the language or saying that you care about culture or whatever, sort of the buzzy terms, but you're actually doing what you're saying. And that, I guess, integrity or something seems like something that would be not present necessarily if you hired somebody for a skill set alone, especially understanding where a lot of people in internet security come from, not always, super up and up places. And so, if you guys don't align on core values, there's, a lot of room for, I think, that to become a real issue.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things I also realize is culture requires a lot of effort. You can't just say, this is our culture and step away and expect it to happen. You have to enforce the culture and enforce your core values and hold people accountable. Otherwise, you'll start slowly sliding back to the way things used to be, or to a way that it doesn't serve what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can you tell us about your book, The Smartest Person in the Room? Why did you write it? And what is it? I think the title is, pretty obvious what it's about, but can you break it down for us? I usually like to have a copy of the book to actually go over first, but we didn't have that opportunity today. So
I wrote the book about my entrepreneurial journey. I was very frustrated with the industry, with cybersecurity, because there's a lot of people in the industry that are super intelligent, like rationally intelligent, high IQ, with a very low EQ or people skills or kind of non-existing emotional intelligence. And in the industry, we've accepted it. It's okay if you're super smart and treat everybody horrible, because that's just the way it is. And as we talked about at the beginning of the show, I don't like the status quo. So I felt like, I've got two choices here. I'm extremely frustrated with the industry because I don't like working around these people who are always trying to prove that they're smarter than me, and they're trying to talk over people's head. They're trying to make solutions overly complicated. I didn't enjoy that at working with them. So I thought about getting out of the industry and doing something else. But then I thought, this is an opportunity to contribute back to the industry. And I have my own company. If I can fix this problem in my company, bring back the people skills and add that to the already high IQ, add EQ, then I can help the industry and help people that have a high IQ wonder why they're under a glass ceiling as well. So I did that in my company. I did weekly training and established the core values, did communication training, emotional intelligence training, people skills training, how to build rapport, neurolinguistic programming training. We did a lot of things in my company, and what worked is what I put in the book. And the idea is I'm hoping that the framework I have in the book, which is 7 steps, can start people on a path to improve or add people skills to their team of already high IQ individuals.
Okay. Well, maybe if you don't mind, can we go through these 7 steps, at least to some degree, and mostly so that we can develop a little bit of context around, like we discussed, if you're not on board with the mission and you're not on board with the values, you're probably not teachable either. But assuming that you've bridged that gap and you've got everybody, the people are sort of in alignment with the company mission and all that sort of stuff, how do you begin layering on this knowledge, and how do you start taking them from, just, I don't know, brilliant engineer to brilliant leader?
Right. Well, the first step in my book is awareness. You have to have some self-awareness as well as awareness of others. I talk about neurolinguistic programming, or NLP, quite a bit in my book. And from an awareness perspective, one of the things we don't understand as humans a lot is our behavior is actually very predictable. If there's a trigger, we automatically run this program and we do the thing we've always done. So from a NLP perspective, we have to realize that our brains are not hardwired. We can rewire them or change that program that automatically runs. So somebody says something and we automatically get defensive and react that way, and it doesn't serve the situation. We have the power to notice when someone says something, stop that behavior, do a control C, as I like to say, which is a break, and stop that behavior and run a different program. So from an awareness perspective, it's important to understand those triggers and that you automatically run a program. And that if that program is not serving you, if you all automatically find yourself in an argument every time, or in a situation where somebody doesn't understand you, then you need to alter that behavior. The second step is mindset. I talk about fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. A lot of people tend to have a fixed mindset. They think that their brain is hardwired, that their traits are not malleable, that they can't learn something new. And I try to shift people to the growth mindset. In cybersecurity, a lot of people have a fixed mindset, and they'll say things like, I'm just not good with people. And if you say that you're telling yourself that's the truth and you can't get good with people. With a growth mindset, you might say, I'm not that great with people right now, but I know I can improve. Just like I didn't know what a router was or how to program before, but I figured it out. It's just a little bit different skill set.
Yeah, and that one's a funny one too, because it really, like, I guess I've never understood it, right? I mean, by the time they come to you as a highly trained technical engineer of some variety, like, they've obviously spent a lifetime learning, right? Like, so this concept that now we're fixed, I got to the end of the road and now I'm done, like, or that I can't somehow improve or go forward from here seems so odd to me, because especially for people who came up through technology, and maybe just given the time frame in which we're coming through this technology, where it's literally evolving as we're all growing older, people who have been a part of this, like, I speak as a guy who did a lot of freelancing. I mean, I'm largely self-taught in the ways that I do, run all the software that I run, which is I didn't get the education. So I just sat down, I did the project, and I had to figure out how to do it, right? I had to make it work. And I think there's probably a lot of people in sort of hacking, white hat or otherwise, that sort of figure out their own way. They have to solve stuff. So they're amazing problem solvers, and so when they come to you and they say, hey man, I'm just, I'm not good with people, and that's that, like, it just seems so counter to their own existence. I don't even understand it.
I don't understand it either. And what's interesting is, like, technical skills are a finite skill set. Technology changes. People skills are an infinite skill set. If you get good with people, that's going to serve you the rest of your life. If you learn one specific programming language, that might serve you for 3 years. So from a return on investment perspective, it's better to invest in people skills from my perspective, because, and I have this discussion with my engineers, or my, I used to have this discussion with them, because they would say, I'm just not good with people. But I'm like, well, what would happen if you became good with people? Because you've got a spouse, you've got parents, you've got a child, you interact with people on a daily basis. Just what would happen if you actually improved with people? And it gets them thinking a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's funny. I recently went through a software development boot camp, and I never really realized, because I've always been kind of outgoing. I've always been somewhat good with interactions and dealing with people. But I never realized how far out there and how bad personal skills people can be until I went through that boot camp. And there was a few people in that course that I was like, how do you function? How do you deal with your day-to-day everything? Because it almost seems like just being on a Zoom call with the class is like ruining it. Like, it's, oh my gosh, I have to talk. And that to me is, it really kind of was an eye-opener that there are people out there that just really struggle with that and have a hard time. And this conversation just brought that to the forefront and made me think of that a little bit. So I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, definitely.
So we were on
Up
the
to
second
number
or
3.
third. Yep. What's number 4?
Okay. I think we only did step 1 and 2.
We're
Step
up
3
to
is
3.
Okay.
Yeah, step 3 is acknowledgement. And I think acknowledgement starts with self-acknowledgement. One of the things I realized as a leader is I wasn't good with acknowledging people, my staff. And when I reflected back on my life, I realized that I never acknowledged myself. I remember finishing the Ironman World Championship in 2015, and that was a big accomplishment. It took me like 10 years to get there. But instead of taking it like 1 second and saying, this is pretty freaking cool, and pat myself on the back, I was automatically thinking about what's the next thing I'm going to accomplish. And I realized that if I don't acknowledge myself or have problems with that as a leader, I'm going to have problems acknowledging my staff. And then it's important to acknowledge the behavior you want more of as well. I think in cybersecurity and other industries, people tend to point out mistakes, and then what happens is you get more mistakes. Like one of the studies that I like to reference is there was a study where there's a wet floor, and they put up two different signs. One of the signs said, "Caution, wet floor, don't slip." The other one said, "Caution, wet floor, walk carefully." So the sign that resulted in less people falling was this one that said, "Walk carefully." And I always think about that when I'm acknowledging someone, because you want to acknowledge the behavior you want more of. That's what you focus on is what happens. The fourth step is communication. This is a massive topic, obviously. One of the things I focus on in communication is one of the NLP presuppositions that says the meaning of communication is the response you get. So if you're not getting the right response from the person you're communicating with, the ownership is on you to alter how you communicate. Most of us blame the other person for just not getting it, for not understanding, for not listening, but that doesn't really serve anybody. If you're trying to get through to someone or get a budget for a company, then you need to be able to communicate in a way that is received and you get the outcome you are looking for. So that forces the ownership back on you and forces you to look at how you can alter how you communicate.
Yeah, no, I love that one, actually, especially, you mentioned being a big advocate for personal responsibility. Both Mike and I are big advocates for that as well. And, owning your mistakes and owning your successes and all that stuff, I think is really valuable. But I guess, I'm somewhat familiar with NLP, but not deeply familiar. So that's actually sort of a core tenet of it is really interesting to me.
Right. Yeah. NLP is really, a lot of it's about ownership of your behavior. Yeah. Step 5 is monotasking. Monotasking is the opposite of multitasking. I think we've been brainwashed to multitask. People like to brag about it on their LinkedIn profile that they're, an expert multitasker. To me, that's a red flag. That means you're very busy, but you don't get anything accomplished. So, we need to shift. We need to shift from being busy to productive. And monotasking helps with two things. It helps you be more productive, because if you have concentrated effort on something for, let's say, a 50-minute chunk of time, versus going back and forth between email, a paper you're writing, a text message, and all that context switching. If you have focused effort, you get way more done. So that is one reason to do monotasking. The other reason is presence. If you are monotasking when you're with somebody and you're present, that means you're going to be a better communicator, because you're not checking your messages while you're having a conversation, and you're not thinking about something else either. That's the hardest part. It's like turning off all the stuff that's going through your mind and being present with who you're communicating with. So I'm a big fan of monotasking.
Yeah, I think that's a really great concept. And actually, it's one I guess I never really hear of, right? I mean, I do hear people all the time say, how great they are doing 1,000 different things. But like, even just in my own experience, the days that end best for me are the days that I was, I guess, more mono-focused on a singular activity. I find that the days where I spend all day jumping around from email to fire to fire to fire, those days by 5 o'clock, I'm wiped. My brain is just done and I'm out of it. Right. But the other days, the days that I've been able to focus all my energy on one thing or another, I find that I'm much more resilient in the evenings. Like I've got my whole evening ahead of me instead of, my whole day in the rear view.
So Ryan, you actually have talked about this before. I've never actually heard it called monotasking. It's kind of
I haven't
cool.
either. That's a new idea to me.
It's a cool term. I like that. But you used to do the Pomodoros, and you would set, the 50-minute timer or whatever it was, and just focus on that one thing. And I think that's kind of the same principle. And it can
focused
go
work on a single thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, and I think that's right. And I mean, in the case of a Pomodoro, each sprint, I guess you might call it, would be, you could do whatever you want in any given sprint, right? So over the course of a day, you might do 10 sprints and do 10 different activities. But in those hyper-focused moments, you're not doing anything else. And so, much like this idea of monotasking. And I suppose it's probably a little bit like that, right? People need breaks. People have to stop and do whatever. But if they can resume their task, then, that probably helps.
Right. I usually advocate like a 50-minute chunk of time, because you can focus for 50 minutes and go to the bathroom or do whatever you need to do some push-ups or kind of wake up, get some coffee. But yeah, monotasking will certainly help you get much more done. And it is like the Pomodoro technique. They're basically the same thing.
And what I like about monotasking too, as a phrase, is I feel like you could get just as much social value with saying monotasking instead of multitasking. I think you just need something to say that you're productive. And I think people construe multitasking as being that word. But I think you could say, you know, I'm a master at monotasking. I think it would still sound like you're doing something important, right? So for people with bad LinkedIn profiles or people who don't realize that they're selling themselves, you know, in a weird way by saying how great they are at doing everything at once, maybe that's a way to change your language and get a different, you know, get a different look from people, or at least have them ask, what's a monotasking? What is that?
Exactly. It would probably be a way to boost their profile because people might not know what it is and ask about it. Exactly.
Yeah. Yep, I love that.
I didn't realize, you know, I guess monotasking is still a relatively new term. You know, we've been
well, and like Mike said, right? I mean, there's Pomodoro methods, there's all kinds of different methodologies for doing this, right? But that particular language, you know, the calling it monotasking, for me, I don't know, for me that really resonates. So I mean, for me, it seems like a better way of saying something that people are already doing, you know, because we do talk about, oh, well, focus, you know, you need to focus, you need to do, you know, all these kinds of things. But we don't talk about it in a way that it's okay. This is how you should work, is in a monotask sort of system, you know? So I think that you could almost introduce that as sort of like leadership language, right? This is the way that we do your job. Your job is not to jump around and do 1,000 different things. Your job is to do this thing really well.
As someone who works in audio world, mono stands out to me as one, you know, like one mic, one channel. This microphone is dedicated to the snare drum. That's all it's going to do is record the snare drum all day. And, you know, when the mix down happens for the show, you know, you've got a bunch of mono tracks that have recorded the snare drum, the kick drum, this and all that. The final project is done. You've got all the different recordings and it sounds great and it's panned in a bunch of different ways. Sounds awesome, but it all comes down to that one track that recorded that one thing and stayed focused and got the job done. So,
and that's a much better take than what I've got as a father of a teenage son in high school. For me, mono is like communicable disease, you know, so it's actually, you know, I appreciate your view.
That's funny. Where are we at on your list? I think we have a few more.
Yeah, we were at step 5. And with monotasking, a friend of mine always said this about monotasking, and it makes sense. He always says, do you want to be the star of your own show or your own movie, or the supporting actor or actresses of somebody else's? So if you're multitasking and you're always responding to somebody else, you're really supporting somebody else and not your own life to some degree.
Yeah, that's very true.
I like that.
Yeah, the next step is empathy. That's step 6. Empathy is a challenging thing for people because it requires you to sort of get in touch with how you feel so you can relate to how somebody else feels. And I talk about 2 different types of empathy, cognitive and affective. Cognitive is really perspective taking. From a leadership perspective, you want to have high cognitive empathy. You can take somebody else's perspective. The second one is affective empathy. That's where you feel the same as somebody else feels. As a leader, you want to have low affective but high cognitive. You want to understand how somebody feels, but you don't want to get all wrapped around like feeling the same way they do, because it's not productive. And today in our society, I feel like there's so much focus on division, on, you know, what COVID vaccine supporters versus anti-vax supporters, Republicans versus Democrats. You know, there's like, it's always this versus that. So whenever we look at somebody, we see them as, oh, they're a Trump supporter or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So we automatically think they're different than us, and or they're a COVID vaccine supporter, or they're an anti-vaxxer. So it's
whatever binary. It's like either on or off, one or the other. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And in cybersecurity, it's like, oh, that's the sales team. We're the engineers, or that's the, you know, they're managers. They don't understand us. It doesn't matter. It's like there's focus on this difference. But when we all always focus on the difference, we forget that we all have this human condition in common. And it's hard to have empathy for someone when you see them different from you. But as humans, we all have a lot of the same struggles and the same challenges, and we can be more empathetic if we understand that and stop focusing on the differences and focus on the similarities.
Yeah, I think that's a nice distinction on that too, because I think a lot of times when people think of empathy, they think of maybe this, I don't know, people call it like, sort of snowflakey attitude of people these days, where it's, you're being empathetic to the point that it's like, oh, and that might be more that version of empathy you were talking about that is more where you're absorbing their feelings and you're feeling it. You're not just recognizing the way they feel and then treating them accordingly. So I think maybe, to your point, that balance is where it's at.
Yeah, exactly. Step 7, the last step is Kaizen. Kaizen is a Japanese word that means constant and never-ending improvement or continuous improvement.
I like that.
So with anything in life, we have to realize we're not, especially if it's a new skill, we're not going to automatically be a master at it. In fact, we may have to unlearn a lot of things that we learn that aren't actually helping us. So if you look at a curve, we may have a start here on a skill, but we actually may go down a little bit before we go up. So with Kaizen, as long as we're making incremental improvement, that's what matters. And I think it's important because a lot of people feel like after a couple of tries, if they can't figure something out, they're just not good at it. Whereas when you adopt the Kaizen approach, it gives you the courage to start because you realize as long as I'm making an improvement, or if I took the wrong direction, I can correct it. As long as I'm making slow progress, that's what matters. And I think most people tend to overestimate what they can do in 1 year. So they get frustrated if they don't accomplish it, but they underestimate what they can do in 3 years.
Yeah.
And that's really where Kaizen comes in. Because if you make continuous improvement, over 1 year, you may not be as far as you wanted to be, but over 3 years, you'll probably be way further ahead than you ever thought you would be.
Well, and it's interesting too how this ties back maybe to this idea of monotasking, right? I mean, if you're trying to do too many things at once, right? If you got your irons in 100 different fires, you might be making incremental improvement, but you only have so much bandwidth to make incremental improvement, right? So you might do 5 steps forward in each of these 20 different buckets instead of 25 steps forward in one bucket. And so, and that, I mean, just like you mentioned with niching down in business, I mean, niching down as a human too is also a challenge. But I think the point is that focused attention will bring that.
100%. Yeah. I remember I used to work with this guy and focused on the right things as well, priorities. I used to work with this guy and his boss gave him like 7 different tasks. And he wouldn't ask his boss, which one of these is priority? His boss said they're all equal priority. He said, okay, I guess I'll do all of them half-assed then. So it's kind of like what you said. you gotta focus on one for a while, then go the next one, and then go the next one. You can't just do them all at once because you're not going to do a very good job,
Yeah. No, it makes sense. Well, no, I think that's a really powerful message. I mean, that whole monotasking thing. I wanted to, now that we've sort of explored these 7 steps, I wonder if we could talk just a little bit about the application here in the last maybe 10 or 15 minutes that we've got.
Sure.
Let's talk about, so we've got a tech team, highly, and I guess it could be any industry where you're dealing with several highly trained, smartest people in the room. And so, but there's a lot of dynamics that happen between those people. So how do you start, I guess, pulling everybody together and begin applying these steps?
Right. So what I did is the core values. So my core values, like one of them was a growth mindset. One of them was about communication, that to listen clearly and communicate succinctly. So I already had the core values, and then I started doing the training. So if somebody didn't embrace the training, they were out of alignment with our core values, because one of the core values was basically a growth mindset. So that's the way I sort of like handled that, because I realized not everybody is going to want to do people skills training or emotional intelligence training. But I sort of had the preamble that these are our core values. And if you agree to these core values, which you did, then this thing should not be a problem for you to learn or attend or make an effort to learn. And that's how I handled it in my organization. Because with technical people, they don't want to learn a lot of these things. But I weeded out people that didn't align with the core values. So I sort of, like I said, set it up from the beginning that they would embrace these things. Not everybody, of course, embraced them to the same degree.
Yeah. Well, and what kind of conflict arises in a room like that, right? So you've got several people working on a team, each are bringing their own highly specialized knowledge. I mean, is there a lot of, I don't know, sort of like intellectual bullying or something where somebody's smarter than somebody else, or I know this better than you, or, you know, I mean, do those sorts of things take place in this kind of dynamic?
Those things take place all the time. They used to take place all the time in my organization, the intellectual bullying specifically. It's almost like, because and that's why I call the book The Smartest Person in the Room. Everybody wants to be the smartest person in the room. That's what makes them feel significant. And everybody wants to feel significant. So they're going to do whatever they can do. Their ego is going to do whatever it can do to make sure they are the smartest person in the room so they feel significant. So from an intellectual bullying perspective, it was almost like somebody would wait until somebody said the smallest inaccurate thing and then pounce on them and call them stupid for not knowing it. Or when somebody had a great idea, somebody said, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. So as you can imagine, this sort of environment doesn't do well for collaboration or communication. And that, when I started witnessing that over and over and over, that's why I had those established the core values. And that's why I wrote the book. And that's why I did the training in my organization, because I needed an effective team, not a team that's always one individual is always trying to prove that they're smarter than everybody else. That is not an effective team. I need a team that collaborates and realizes we all have something to contribute, even though it may not be the same as you. It may be a different perspective, but that still raises us up as a team. And that's really what a lot of the training was about.
Well, even in your niche, for example, in healthcare, you know, there's a lot of smart people in that world, but that might not be, you know, network savvy or cybersecurity savvy. They're very smart people, but if you come down on them because they didn't know they needed to block this port on their fire, you know, whatever, they might take offense to that, versus, you know, because they are intelligent, smart people. If you come down on them wrong, that could lose a client for you just by approaching it wrong versus saying, hey, we noticed that this port was exposed. It would be a smart thing to, you know, change that, or whatever the scenario is. It's all about the approach and not saying, hey, you're so stupid, how come you didn't know that, kind of thing. That's essentially what it comes down to for the most part, right?
Yeah, exactly. And with clients, you know, that initially these sort of things were a problem in my company, where they'd be like, oh, they've got all these unpatched Windows systems, you know, they're idiots. Why don't they know any better? And I'm like, they're not. Their focus is on providing healthcare to patients, not patching their Windows machines. You know, you're not. And I always have to like turn it around, like, you know, what if the doctor, like, that's a client of ours, said, well, you don't even know how to take somebody's blood pressure. You must be stupid. It's separate skill set, separate profession. So why should we in cybersecurity or in IT blame somebody for not knowing what we're doing when they have a different skill set and that we don't know what they're doing? We don't know their profession. Yeah, it's a weird dynamic that it still happens a lot, and that's why I hope my book makes, you know, an impact.
Well, on that note, why don't you tell people where they can find your book and how they can reach out to you if they have any questions?
Yeah, they can find my book on Amazon. It's probably the best place. It's on Barnes & Noble and pretty much any major book distributor. It's also on Audible.
Nice.
I had an Audible version recorded. Kaleo Griffith narrated it. He did a really good job. He did Trump's The Art of the Deal, a Tim Ferriss book, and a lot of other, you know, somewhat high-profile books. And people can find out about me on my website, christianespinosa.com, or my new cybersecurity company, bluegoatcyber.com.
Nice. Excellent. Well, thanks so much for that. And I think one last thing, maybe before we go, metal. So let's talk bands. Hey, who is the you know, the emerging metal band, or the sleeper metal band that nobody knows about that everybody should know about?
My favorite metal band is Nightwish. They're symphonic metal. I saw them in the US. I kind of was like a groupie for a while. I went from Chicago to Minneapolis to LA to San Francisco and to somewhere else. I saw them about 8 times, just kind of followed them. Oh, Boston. I saw them in Boston. I kind of just followed them around the US. They're not very popular in the US. They're extremely popular in Europe. But I think Nightwish is the best band out there.
That's
so
awesome.
Yeah, you should check them out.
Yeah, no, I always throw out my my recent favorite, and it's sort of akin to like a Guar or somebody like that, is this band called Necrogoblicon. So if you get a chance, check out Necrogoblicon. They're led
it's
by
an interesting name.
Yeah, well, their lead singer is a goblin, and he's awesome. And so anyway, they're a lot of fun, and the kids can rally behind it because they love the little goblin. In fact, John Goblicon has a book out as well you can pick up. So it's pretty funny. But yeah, John Goblicon is the artist. So
I would go with my favorite right now is Ginger, spelled with a J.
Yeah, they're great.
J-N-G-R. Yeah,
and I think they're Ukrainian. So you know, you
they're
can do Ukrainian with that.
And it's a female lead singer that can belt it, just amazing.
Okay.
So
yeah,
I'll check it out.
I've got a buddy in Russia that is always sending me bands, and Ginger was one of the ones he gave me not too long ago. And so, but yeah, I guess they're from, you know, basically the front line of what's going on in Ukraine right now. So it's kind of a interesting one.
Yeah, I'll check out Ginger. I have an affinity for some reason for metal bands with female lead singers. Like Nightwish has a female lead singer.
You will love them if you like that.
Yeah, I like Arch Enemy also. They have a female lead singer, so I probably like Ginger as well.
Nice. Yeah. I'll have to check them out.
Yeah, so, no, cool. They're amazing. And I was trying to see, I know this is super unprofessional of a podcaster. I should probably not be staring at my phone, but I was trying to look because he said Ginger, they're from the Donbass region, which is interesting. I was going to see if I had one other in there. Oh, Arch Enemy. That's the other one. So how about that?
Yeah.
And so,
they're awesome. They're
aligned with our folks over there.
Yeah, their Vakken live show is incredible. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, the other one, God, I'm spacing on the name, but it's this Vulcan death metal or a Viking death metal. I keep threatening to take my kid to see because they I guess they set the whole crowd down and everybody starts rowing and stuff. It sounds pretty awesome. So anyway, we're going to check it out one of these days. Yeah. So cool. Well, thanks so much. We really appreciate you, Christian. This has been awesome.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Mike.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.